not live yet. We're live now, Mark. We're
Okay.
live.
I love it.
We'll
Uh,
give it a minute or so. Let people jump in. Let them join,
Copy that.
and then we can get started.
Let me find you here so I can spread this out to the supernatural family. But I
Yes,
might have to do that in a couple of minutes. There's only so much an old man can do with his mind and body simultaneously.
I'm gonna help you out a little bit, old man.
Thank you. You're going to give me something to retweet.
Yes.
Love it. Let me go to my
All
home.
right. I shared you the link.
Fantastic. Things are moving rather slowly on my computer.
Well, if we had pure capitalism, perhaps we'd have faster computers.
Indeed, I believe you are correct in that assessment.
I'm hoping that people can post comments here. I have the comments set up. We'll see if they can do it. I hope so.
Fantastic.
All right. Okay,
Oh,
Mark,
so
we can get
everybody,
started.
yes, we're going to do it. Here we are. Welcome to the premiere episode of Capitalist Corner. I am Mark Pellegrino, chairman of the American Capitalist Party, and my co-host, my esteemed co-host,
Esteemed, yes.
who I love like a brother, Michael Liebowitz, who is the co-chairman of the American Capitalist Party. Now, we're going to be talking about current events. Now, whether I'm here or not, Michael's going to be helming the ship if I'm
Hold
not.
on, hold on, hold on, hold on.
Hold on.
I
Okay.
need a little bit of a better intro. You got to
You need
tell
a
them I'm
better-
also the host of my own podcast, The
That's
Rational
right, that's right.
Egoist.
He's awesome. There you go.
I mean, I need something here. You're a movie star. You don't need the kind of advertisements that I need, but
He
I
is,
need some stuff.
he is also the host of The Rational Egoist. I think one of the best podcasts out there. I have been on it a number of times. He does great debates. If you can tune into his to his channel, find him on X. Michael, what's your handle on X so that people can go straight to you?
Unfortunately, my handle on X is Liebowiz out. Now, let me. That has to do when I was first released from prison. I chose that as my handle. Now, when I told friends Liebo is out, they said maybe that's a poor choice of words. But
Hey,
I was out of prison, not out of the closet.
Well, you're out. You're well.
Not that there's anything wrong with that.
You're
I'm
out of
just
prison,
saying.
but you're also out as a capitalist, and I think
Yes.
we need more people out as capitalists in order to make this country, the ship of state, set itself right again. So we're going to be talking a little bit about the process of deporting immigrants, what that means to us as capitalists, especially without due process, and we're also going to be talking about tariffs and their actual effects on folks and from a capitalist perspective. But before we do that, let's provide some context, because capitalism was a term given to us by Marx. And basically, most people think of capitalism in the terms that Marx sort of gave us, which is the government more or less acts as a tool for the wealthy, for the moneyed class. And they bend the rules in order to make the moneyed class prosper at the expense of the quote unquote proletariat, the working man. That's a huge thumbnail sketch that incorporates a lot of stuff that I'm dropping, but just to give you a basic sketch. Now, capitalism from our point of view is very different. Hey, Michael, can you give a thumbnail sketch of what our concept of capitalism means?
Sure. Well, any dictionary or most dictionaries will simply define capitalism as the private ownership of the means of production. So individuals own the property, right? We have property ownership. But implicit in that, and if you dig a little deeper in the capitalism that we're advocating and defending, is the system that upholds individual rights. It's the individual's right to his life, his right to take the actions necessary to maintain that life, which means accumulating property, because if we can't accumulate property, we can't sustain ourselves. So basically, we're arguing for a free system where people are free to do whatever they want as long as they do not initiate force or fraud against other people.
That's right, folks. Liberty is freedom from force. In a capitalist society, initiated force is banned from society. That means you are entirely free to choose every aspect of your life. What a beautiful world that would be if we would only leave people alone and let them do that. So, with that in mind, now let's talk about the immigration crisis in the United States. Over the 4 years of the Biden administration, we had several million people came across the border illegally, quote unquote illegally, not by legal processes. They snuck through. And many of them went to sanctuary cities where they're being harbored by states and cities who claim that they have a right to be there by virtue of the fact that they're humans. And of course, the prominent wing of the nationalist right wing, which seems to sorry, my
Oh, don't break stuff.
which seems to predominate on the right and the Republican Party, thinks the opposite, that you have to enter here through a process, a vetting process. They're even starting to attempt the idea of selling entrance here for millions and millions and millions of dollars in an attempt to force a certain type of person to come here. And anybody else who comes here illegally is outside of the law. Now, I even read in a recent Charles Murray op-ed in the New York Post that non-citizens do not have the same rights as citizens. Now, this is a very interesting topic that I think we have to discuss, because I think when a human being comes into the United States, they come under the umbrella of the protections of the Constitution, irrespective of whether they are a citizen or not. And that means that we are required to treat them a certain way. So we have this immigration quote unquote crisis caused by the government and furthered by the right wing, who's calling it a crisis of crime and criminality and debauchery. And now they are deporting people, and not just deporting them back to their own countries, but in many cases, deporting them to mega prisons in El Salvador. Some of the people who have been deported have not been from the criminal gang that they claim is sent here by and with the complicity of the Venezuelan government to undermine America. So they are an invading force, and this is apparently the president's justification for using the Alien Enemies Act to justify sending them without due process to another country to be imprisoned indefinitely. Now, Michael, what do you think of this? First of all, what should be a capitalist stance on immigration? Number one, and where is everybody going wrong? Where is the left going wrong, and where is the right going wrong? Because they are both going wrong terribly in this case.
Well, there's so many layers to this. First, let me just say that the comments are showing up. So if folks would like to leave their comments, they can. There's many layers to this, and I think the first thing to address is what you said about capitalism, right? Capitalism has to do with individual rights. The individual's right to maintain his or her own life, to accumulate property without having force initiated against them. That is true regardless of borders that happen to be set up. Right? So individuals have the right to go from point A to point B without being harassed, without having force initiated against them. So as a pure philosophical point, as we have the wonderful Jonathan Honig joining us, I can see on the side here, from a purely philosophical point, people have the right to immigrate. They have the right to come into any country. Now, countries do set up laws that might forbid people to come in. They do all kinds of things. But just because a country, whatever country it might be, makes a law doesn't mean that law is right. We're trying to assess the correctness of laws against a philosophical, ethical backdrop. Ours is objectivism, the philosophy of Ayn Rand. So once we can establish that individuals have the right to emigrate, the next step is to say, well, what is the United States of America's stance? Now, if we look at the federal Constitution, there is nothing in the Constitution, and this is strange for the so-called originalists out there, the conservatives, because in the original meaning of the Constitution, there's nothing in there that grants the federal government authority over immigration. It simply doesn't exist. They are granted authority over naturalization, who becomes a citizen. And at the founding of the country, they viewed that as important because those were the people that get to vote, they get to impact laws, and they were very concerned about European countries basically sending plants over here that could become citizens and then affect this country in different ways. Now, as far as the American laws that you talked about, due process, according to, well, first of all, James Madison, in his report of 1800, which anybody can read, who the father of the Constitution, he said that the federal government has no authority over immigration. He did say that the federal government has the right to keep people out who are members of a country that we are at war with. Those people could be kept out, and I think for very obvious reasons. But Madison also pointed out that non-citizens are protected under the Constitution, and it's common sense. Otherwise, what could we do? Anybody that comes over here, we could just beat them in the streets. The cops could just go and slaughter them because they're not citizens. Of course, they're protected under the law. And in the 14th Amendment, they actually say all persons. And when they mean citizens, it says citizens. And when it means persons, it says persons. So the first thing is the federal government ought to have no dealings with immigration law at all, according to the Constitution. The next thing is people that are here, that are immigrants and non-citizens, are protected under the law. Now, there's this pesky Alien and Sedition Act, and originally there were the Alien Friends Act, the Alien Enemies Act, and there was also the Sedition Acts. The only one that stood the test of time was the Alien Enemies Act. Now, when these were first written, Jefferson and Madison wrote the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions, and then Madison subsequently wrote the report of 1800. They were very upset with this. Nonetheless, the Alien Enemies Act has stood the test of time. The Alien Enemies Act allows for the deportation of aliens who are from countries with whom we are at war, who are invading us, who are being predatory against us. I think it warrants actually maybe Mark reading from it. So I'm going to find it quickly. I just have to find the last time I texted you, and then I will be able to find it. The Alien Enemies Act. No, that's not it. Okay, this is it right here. So the Alien Enemies Act actually reads Section 1. Whenever there shall be a declared war between the United States and any foreign nation or government, or any invasion, or any predatory incursion shall be perpetrated, attempted, or threatened against the territory of the United States by any foreign nation or government. So there's nothing being done here by a foreign nation or government. And the language that is used when it comes to immigrants about invasion are clearly designed to give the government war powers that they normally do not have. And I would just submit, and then we can, have a little dialogue here. If there's an actual invasion, then they can suspend habeas corpus. How many of these constitutional conservatives out there who are clamoring that this is an invasion are willing to then allow the suspension of habeas corpus that has very real consequences for American citizens?
Yes, well, they certainly seem to be okay with suspending it for the quote-unquote illegal aliens who they're deporting, and it's not a far step from them to us. If they can suspend it for one group of people, they can find reasons to suspend it for another. That's why people like Madison and Jefferson were strict in the enumerated powers clause of the Constitution. They did not want the government to expand and grow the way it could. They thought all power not explicitly stated in the Constitution went to the people or to the states. They understood the compact theory of government, wherein the states were co-equal partners in this union and could at any time break the union. Whereas Lincoln, of course, made the perpetual union argument, as did Jackson, that you can't break this compact. But as far as I'm concerned, if you're a sovereign being and you're represented by a sovereign state, if the federal government is acting outside of its stated purpose, which is to protect and defend individual rights, and they are starting to violate those, then you do have a right to exit that contract, just like you would have the right to exit a contract with an abusive employer. If you value free choice, if you value individual rights, the type of society that we say is not only ideal, but achievable. So yes, and this act has been invoked a couple of times in history. It's been invoked against the Germans and the Japanese when we were at war with them, and to horrible consequences. These were not the Japanese internment of the Japanese was one of the most unjust periods in the history of America, and this act was used as the reason to take the property of these folks and inter them in camps and hold them there for the duration of the war. And this act now is being used to justify the deportation of these Venezuelan, quote unquote, gang members of Tren de Agua, who now the administration claims has some form of intimate relationship with Maduro over in Venezuela. There's some sort of enforcement wing some sort of informal army and enforcement wing of the Maduro administration are acting in the interests of the Venezuelan government to undermine the United States of America. Is this absurd? This is absurd on its face.
Of course it is. And by the way, I read a very interesting post the other day on X, and it was from the historian Timothy Schneider. Now, I don't know his politics, and I really don't care. I care about the accuracy of the statement. And what he said was that if immigrants aren't entitled to due process, then nobody is. Citizens either. And the reason is this. If the feds show up and they arrest Mark Pellegrino and say Mark Pellegrino is illegally here, he's an Italian immigrant, we're getting him out of here and we're sending him to El Salvador. Well, they're claiming that you're an illegal alien, so then you don't have due process. You don't have due process. How can you prove you're actually an American citizen? So you end up being harmed by the very laws that they're saying are going to protect you. Now, there's other things too. I mean, there's consequentialist BS about immigrants are criminals when they have lower crime rates than native-born Americans, that they're at the teat of the state, draining the welfare system when they actually pay more on net than what they take out. Now, I'm not in favor of them getting any welfare benefits, but I'm not in favor of anybody getting welfare benefits, right? But if we're going to talk about it, we ought to at least be honest about what's occurring and not create straw men and boogeymen that are meant to scare people into supporting ridiculous, unconstitutional policies.
Indeed, but what the right wing is highlighting, unfortunately, is some of the policies of the sanctuary cities and sanctuary states, which have the right idea in that they understand human beings have a right to migrate. They have a right to immigrate from a worse situation to a better situation. That's part of respecting individual rights. Where the left goes wrong is that they think they can subsidize these folks. Now, the federal government seems to make it impossible for these immigrants to work while they're in process. And so they've set them up with housing and supplementary incomes. And of course, this has also started a black market of illicit trade, so that some of these folks can make money where they're not able to make it. They're prevented by the government from making it, from getting jobs. And so these aspects are highlighted by the right, in some respects justifiably so, because you could come over into this country, but you don't have a right to parasitize other people in the country. But the left makes it happen. They set up a situation whereby some of these immigrants are actually put on the dole and parasitizing the country. And some of these immigrants are forced not to work. And because they can't work, they have to engage in illicit activity in order to work. So it sort of sets up an atmosphere where some of these folks can engage in criminal activity. The right wing can then highlight that as the majority, as if that's what's the majority of the immigrant community is doing, and then use that as an excuse to dig up what should be dead laws in order to exercise undue authority over these poor people. So, I mean, we're stuck in a situation at the moment where neither the left nor the right has the proper solution to the problem.
Well, if you look, I mean, just look at how many people Barack Obama deported. He wasn't. He was no friend of immigrants, despite the Dream Act. He was deporting people en masse. And it's not as if the left has a coherent stance toward immigrants. It's not as if they're claiming, yes, we should have immigration because of individual rights, because then that ultimately forces them into the corner of defending the capitalist policies that they have no interest in defending. So it ends up just a hodgepodge of nonsense. And they, of course, get it every so often. They say, we need immigration reform. We're going to get together. And they never do, because they keep it as an issue. But importantly, Mark, while neither the Republicans nor the Democrats have a coherent position on immigration, neither does the Libertarian Party. They're all over the place as well. They've got nativists amongst them as well. The Mises Caucus, for instance, many of them are very much opposed to immigration. Dave Smith has advocated to have the military on the southern border to stop immigrants from coming in. So maybe this is a good time to talk about what the American Capitalist Party, what our position is on immigration.
Well, this is going to be somewhat unpopular, because if you ever read Walter Williams' America's Contempt for the Constitution, you'll understand that it's not just the political elitists that have destroyed our Constitution. It's the American people as well. The American people have contempt for the limitations of government, because there's lots of groups out there who are now dependent on political patronage. I mean, I don't know if you know the exact figures, Michael, but I mean, it's somewhere over the neighborhood of 50% of the country is now dependent on the government in some way, shape, or form. And that means they need the status quo to remain as it is. And any threat to that status quo, is a threat to their quote unquote livelihood. Now, open immigration means that there's going to be more competition for jobs in industries which have now lobbied the government to have special privileges, legal privileges that protect their industries and protect their jobs against competition. But in a free labor market, in an open immigration market where people can come and go freely, competition between in jobs would be high. This is something that many people in America do not want. Now, they don't want it and don't understand that their desire not to have this is actually cutting off their own noses to spite their face. Yes, they're saving certain industries, keeping the prices elevated of labor within certain industries, but at the expense of the cost of their own living, which rises and rises and rises as these costs rise. For example, we have now Trump pressuring auto industries, and we'll get into this later, to start developing here, to start building and manufacturing here to avoid tariffs. Now, one of the reasons they went to Mexico, one of the reasons they went to other countries like China, was because many of those countries have only labor as capital, which means it's cheaper. It's cheaper. The product is cheaper for us to buy because the labor is cheaper. Now, you may think that's unjust, but it's not. Labor is cheap, and labor is the only capital for certain countries until it's not. Just like it was in the United States, you go through a period where that's the case, and then you become rich enough to farm out that labor elsewhere. And now bringing the industry back to the United States subjects all that labor to labor law, to unions, to all those extra costs that are going to start hurting the pocketbooks of the American people. That's just not a pragmatic or practical problem. That's a moral issue. That's as we as capitalists and objectives understand, the pragmatic and the moral are identical to each other. They are one and the same. The practical is the moral. So this presents quite a fucking problem. So, but the American Capitalist Party, sorry for using the F word, would have an open immigration policy. Now, that doesn't mean that people come in unvetted. That means that criminals, felons, violent people, and people with communicable diseases will be asked to not stay. But anybody else who comes here and desires to work, they wouldn't get supplementation from the government. They wouldn't be parasitizing any U.S. citizen. They would come here to work and make a living like everybody else and have access to the American dream, which is the American dream is just bettering your material and psychological and philosophical place in the world. That's all. And that's what they would have a right to. Can you say it any better, Michael?
It's actually interesting because I begrudgingly agree with you and the party's stance. And the first reason is in order to implement it, I believe we would need a constitutional amendment, which I'm okay with advocating for. My hesitancy is while I think it's wise to keep people from coming in who have communicable diseases or who are violent criminals, the methods by which to determine that makes me a skeptic. And what I mean is, first, you'd have to have our government initiate force against these people by detaining them to test them for communicable disease or whatever. But we're also depending on the honesty of our government. And in the case of the criminals, we're depending on the honesty of other governments that have kept accurate records. So that's not to say I don't agree with the party's position. I do, just very begrudgingly because of my distrust of government. But I do think that from a purely individual rights perspective, the threat of having criminals come in or the threat of having communicable diseases come in does warrant those being the bases of restriction. But you said something earlier, Mark, that I wanted to comment on, and that's these people that are afraid to lose their jobs. And it reminds me of the essay by Nathaniel Branden in The Virtue of Selfishness, where he talks about it's called their divine right of stagnation, right? People, a lot of people anyway, seem to think that they have a right to the status quo, that I have a right to this job, or, we opened a mom and pop shop, so we have a right to the patronage at this corner, and nobody else in the neighborhood, they can't go anywhere else, no one can open up another business. And I'm just reminded of when I was a little kid, we had this video store called Video Studio 6. It was very small. Blockbuster moved in and just drove them out, and most of the other video stores, and now Blockbuster's gone, and now we have all the Netflix and Apple TV and whatnot, and there's a lot more that I can't remember right now. But should we all have been stuck watching VHS from Video Studio 6 for the rest of our lives? I mean, the people that were, making horseshoes, should we never have been able to go on trains and automobiles and airplanes because some guy wants to make horseshoes and thinks he has a right to? It's absolutely absurd. It's not. It doesn't make me happy when somebody loses their job, of course, but that's part of progress. It's part of the creative destruction, as Schumpeter talked about. And we need that. And the only way to stop it is by initiating force, which would be immoral. So again, we can see that the moral is the practical. By people being free, by having capitalism, we ultimately end up with a better result for most people.
Indeed. I mean, look at what the car industry did to the horse and buggy industry. Are we worse off for it or better off for it? So you can say that about pretty much any industry, including now budding AI, which is terrifying all of the Luddites, the modern Luddites out there who think it's going to take over the world and probably send us all into a nuclear holocaust and the Terminator 7 scenario. But AI is a tremendous labor saver. It's going to revolutionize our lives in a phenomenal way. Now, with any technological development, of course, the bad guys have access to it too, and they can do bad things. It makes them more capable at doing bad things. But the good guys have virtue behind them and reality behind them, and usually win if they have the self-esteem too. So don't fear technological advance. Don't fear people coming into the country to work because they make us more prosperous. Not only do they make their own lives more prosperous, not only can they take advantages of opportunities that they can't have in their own countries, but they make you and I more prosperous as well. Don't forget that. You have a stake in the in immigration. You have a stake in the fact that people come in here from diverse places and are able to add to our narrative. Now, I mean, some of this though seems to be racially oriented. I'm going to give you a little story. My housekeeper uh, came the other day, and she was crying. She said she was standing in line at a drugstore, and these two little kids came up to her and went bang, 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 bang with their hands, and they said, "Get out of here! You don't belong here."
Ugh.
And their parents laughed, and several people in line agreed. Now she's an immigrant from Guatemala who was here illegally many years ago, but now, of course, is legal. She's a legal citizen of the United States of America, um, and of course, came from a bad place to a better place, and has made her life better as a result. She's never taken federal assistance. She's never taken food stamps. She's worked hard her entire life. She's in her mid 60s. To be attacked by people from that wing of the MAGA movement that seems to be xenophobic and racist was extremely distressing to her. I had to remind her that you are an American. You are the type of person that America attracts. America is an idea. It's not a racial orientation. Now, people seem to be really verklempt. People like the Charlie Kirks of the world, and even the Tucker Carlsons of the world, about our culture being distilled, or our culture being diluted by these immigrants who are coming in. But so let's define what we think the American culture is, because I think they have a very different orientation to it than the capitalists do. Do you agree with me?
Yes, and I think it's a very complex subject. I interviewed a guy, I think maybe a week or so ago, about nationalism. He was a prominent historian, Rogers W. Smith, and he told me in his view that America, there's always been these debates about what America is, and he says he's of the opinion that America is those debates, right? That's
Good.
what America is, that it's not one side or the other, but it's the tension, what are we as a people? Now, that said, the idea of America, which I think we kind of have to separate from culture, the idea behind America is that of individual rights, Republican government, that sort of thing, coming out of John Locke or de Tocqueville and Thomas Paine. Those are the ideals that founded the country, and the ideals that ultimately were somewhat crystallized in the Constitution, although not perfectly. Now, culturally, there's not just one monolithic culture in America, right? I would venture to guess that the neighborhood I grew up in had a vastly different culture than the neighborhood you grew up in, right? But the idea that these foreigners are going to somehow come here and wreck the American culture. Now, obviously, and this is the boogeyman that they put up, if all of Russia and all of China all came here at once, yes, our culture would change. But that doesn't happen. I mean, if that even started to happen, the price of labor would be driven down if it happened, very quickly, and then it wouldn't be so appealing to come here, so people would go elsewhere. I mean, there's economic reasons why we wouldn't just be overwhelmed in that way, and if we started to be, maybe we could have a different discussion. But the argument about immigrants, ruining the culture or spoiling the culture, they've been making that almost since the beginning against the Germans, the Irish, the Jews. The big example was the Chinese Exclusion Act. So it's nothing new. It's just a different target now. Now it's the Mexicans from South America, or the boogeyman that the Chinese are sending all their military-aged males over here, and it's a planned thing that's maybe, I don't know, funded by Soros or who else it is. But there's never any evidence presented for that. And if the culture of America is supposed to be that of a free society, right? How do we uphold the culture of a free society by using force to keep people out? It's like, no, we don't want you to come here and make us less free. We'll handle that on our own. It reminds me of the old joke when George W. Bush said, they hate us for our freedom. And I think it was Reason Magazine said, and his solution to that is to make us less free. And then maybe they won't hate us anymore. But
Yeah.
well, go ahead, Mark.
Well, I was going to say, I just want to jump on that because I think America, more than any other country, associates its culture with classical liberalism. So since we are we used to be a melting pot, various people coming over and bringing what many people consider culture of food and music and language variations and diversity over to the United States. Ultimately, those people came here because they wanted to enjoy the American dream. They wanted to capture that. And many immigrants come over here with that in mind, whether they don't speak English or eat a different kind of food or enjoy a different kind of music, which many people associate with culture. They're still trying to capture what is unique about America, that American exceptionalism that is our culture, that is each and every individual has a right to his own life. You are utterly and totally a sovereign being. That's what they are trying to take advantage of. Now, of course, other states are dominated by ideas as well. Russia is dominated by ideas, China is dominated by ideas, but America has an exceptional form of orientation, of an idea of orientation between the individual and the state that I think becomes our culture more than any other state. So I'm making a long-winded argument for our culture is that classical liberalism that you and I are defending through capitalism.
Now, along with our defense of capitalism that would have us have relatively open borders, there's another assault on capitalism that right now and more vocally comes from the Trump administration, but Biden engaged in it as well. It's this idea that tariffs make us prosperous, right? And first of all, there's the lie when they say that, the foreign country pays the tariff. And some people have responded to that by saying, no, America pays the tariff. But no, neither actually do. Initially, the American company that's importing the goods pays the tariff. But ultimately, when companies have to pay more, it's a cost of production to get their product out there, they can produce less of the product. And when there's less of a product, less supply, when demand stays constant, you end up with higher prices. So the consumers in the end pay the cost of these tariffs so that some jobs might be protected. But worse than that, even is the Wall Street Journal reported that Trump threatened auto companies in America that they better not raise their prices. Trump has, of course, denied it. And then we're left, well, what do we know? But what I know is that's not inconsistent with Trump's behavior. He's done that sort of thing in the past. He threatened Carrier. He's threatened Apple. And I have no reason to think the Wall Street Journal is just going to manufacture this story. So I tend to think that, yes, he did it. But let's just say he didn't. Just the tariffs on their own are horrible policy. They're a massive rights violation against Americans who are importing goods, and they're horrible for the economy. And if he did threaten them, which I think he did, that's absolutely reprehensible. It's downright fascism.
I agree with you, and I stated that on X. And people started jumping on me for calling Trump a Nazi. I was calling him a fascist, not necessarily a Nazi. There is sort of a difference, but you're right. Ultimately, the American consumer pays a higher price for protectionist policies. As we said before, a certain group is going to benefit from this. Automakers are going to benefit from it. Steel producers are going to benefit from it, but at the cost of higher costs for all of those goods, which means higher costs across the board. Any industry that uses steel, from cars to the building and construction industry, computer industry, every industry that uses that tariff protected item is going to be more expensive for the consumer to buy. And that's not good. That's lowering the standard of living for the average American. Now, there are some guys out there now claiming that, oh, no, what these tariffs are going to do is increase demand. They're going to increase demand for these products, and that's actually good. It's stimulating our economy. Well, none of that is true as well. I mean, if something is more expensive, you tend to buy less of it, and bringing American manufacturing home will, of course, increase jobs within a certain sector of the economy at the price of higher labor and higher costs to you and me. There's no avoiding this fact. There's also no avoiding the fact that slapping a 25% tariff on our neighbors is encouraging them to do the same and more to us. Now, this tariff idea that isolating your industries at home will somehow bring prosperity, and excluding trade from the other countries that can produce things more cheaply than you will somehow bring you prosperity, has been done before. It was tried by Herbert Hoover in an attempt to get us out of a spiraling depression with the Smoot-Hawley tariff. And what did that do, Michael? Did that
exacerbated unemployment by a lot.
Indeed.
I think it went from about 6% to about 25% very quickly.
Exactly. It made people unemployed. It made people poor. In fact, there was a term coined for the people who are now living on the streets and now living underemployed existences called Hoovervilles. And that's what started to pop up all over the country as a result of high tariffs trying to artificially elevate the prices of agricultural goods precisely when they needed to fall. Do you know there was a time during the Great Depression, in order to keep the price of pork high, that FDR had something like 9 million hogs slaughtered and burned, precisely when 25% of the population was unemployed or underemployed and were starving. They were destroying crops. Farmers were being subsidized to not grow food in order to maintain a higher price for those goods. And you were forbidden by law in many cases to compete with respect to your prices, because the political class felt that feared deflation more than they feared inflation and all of the fallout from that. So, folks, not folks. Michael, what do you think?
You can call me folks if you want.
I was going to address everybody generally, hoping that most of our listeners are sort of sympathetic to our cause. But what do you think would be the ideal capitalist position with respect to tariffs and corporations in the United States?
I think free trade. I don't even like the idea of, I mean, it's better than not any trade, but these free trade agreements. I think that people should be allowed to trade with whomever they want. Even, countries that we may not like. But that said, freedom comes with responsibility, and you bear the cost of your bad decisions. So if you want to trade with people in countries where they don't have strong rule of law and you end up screwed, don't come crying to the American government. But I think they should be allowed to trade. I think we should just have free trade. It's amazing to me that the capitalist position in the classical liberal tradition was open immigration, free trade. And this is why I've actually been harder on the Trump movement than I am on the left. All my political life that I've been interested in politics, I've been arguing against the left with leftists. I supported every Republican nominee up until Trump. But these policies, in my view, are so bad, and they're being done in the name of capitalism. People talk about Trump as he's the constitutional candidate, he's the pro-capitalism candidate. When you are putting people on planes and sending them out of the country without due process, when you're putting tariffs on companies that want to import foreign goods, that's not capitalism, that's tyranny. And I think it's very important that we make that delineation. And a capitalist society, as we said, it's one where individual rights are respected. People are free to take risks. They're free to earn. Nobody owes anybody else anything. Just because you're born does not mean that I owe you things. Well, you're a lot richer than me, so we put it the other way around. You don't owe me things. But that's freedom. That's a free society. And I think it's very important, especially now that we continue to hammer home the distinction about what capitalism actually is, what it is ideologically, and what it's done historically. And of course, the closest we ever came to a purely capitalist society was in the 1800s. I believe after the end of the Civil War, and we had great prosperity. Of course, the Trumpsters attribute that to tariffs in spite of all economic analysis and what economists say. They hang their hat on that. I think that what they have is an ideology looking for an argument rather than actually looking at the evidence to form their ideology.
I would agree with you. So wait a minute. I just want to get the full implications of this free trade business you're talking about because it's freaking me out, man. Does this mean zero tariffs?
Zero tariffs. Zero tariffs.
Wait a minute. But we'll be dominated by everybody, won't we?
We will. They're ripping us off. The trade deficits. Yes.
Yeah.
The old mercantilist fallacy that if your imports outweigh your exports, you're getting ripped off. Of course, that even when they referred to that, it had to do with gold because they mistakenly thought that gold rather than goods was wealth, and they thought that if gold was leaving the country, you were then less poor. That was the mercantilist fallacy, and it seems that Trump has learned nothing. Since Adam Smith first repudiated the idea in 1776, Ricardo did it. And I remember the first economics book I ever read was Free to Choose by Milton Friedman. And he talked about how ridiculous it is. He said, in fact, it's the exact opposite. We give up our exports so that we can get these imports. It's a shame that we're losing the exports. It's great that we're getting in the imports.
So politicians always, if you've noticed, their phrasing is always about war, fight, war, dominance. Always alternative words for force and violence against others. Guys, to be the most dominant country in the world, you don't need to assert a big stick economic policy whereby you clout people over the head and pressure them into doing what you want. You need only be the freest country in the world. And by tariffing, by knocking your tariffs down to zero, it doesn't matter that other countries are going to be charging us higher tariffs for their goods to protect their particular industries. It's their people who are suffering as a result of that. Our people's standard of living rises as a result. Now, this brings me to something else. People love taxing corporations as if that cost isn't passed on to the consumer, as if it's an act of justice to take the people who have and diminish them to have-nots. What do you think a decent corporate tax rate should be?
Zero.
What?
Zero. Ideally, I don't think there should be any compulsory taxation. I think that if people have the knowledge and the right ideology, I think that people would voluntarily fund the government and we wouldn't need any taxation. Now, right now, I don't think that that's plausible, but I think that the thing to do is set the ideal as zero taxation and then lay out a plan. How do we get there? Let's start lowering taxes. Let's start deregulating. Let's start privatizing. I don't think you can do it all at once. And I think that it needs to be done smartly, which is why I initially praised the idea that the Doge was going to get rid of the Department of Education, but it's being done unprincipled. It's not like they're saying, okay, we believe in individual rights, let's cut these things. They're just cutting to cut. And I think that ultimately, I don't know that it will have disastrous outcomes, but it can.
Well, let's just also say that the ideal behind Doge is in the name. It's a Department of Government Efficiency.
Right.
They don't disagree with the fact that government should be engaged in any of these activities as we do. I think I could safely say that you and I both think that probably 98 to 99% of what the government does today is not only unconstitutional, but a violation of individual rights and shouldn't be done at all. And Doge isn't saying that at all. They're saying we want these programs to be in here. maybe not necessarily the Department of Education for ideological reasons, but we want these other entitlements to be here. You'll get it more efficiently. You'll get your money more efficiently. That's all we want, is we want government to be efficient. When that's an oxymoron, irrespective of who you have in there. They're not questioning the moral premises itself. And let's also not forget, Trump has promised not to touch these entitlements.
Right.
Now, you cannot have your cake and eat it too. You cannot pretend that you are going to have an effect on the deficit and start bringing down real spending in the government and start really taking down this $37 trillion debt that we have, this terrible, onerous millstone around the necks of our children, and not cut these entitlement programs. You just can't, and with the eye towards eliminating them entirely and making charity a completely private act. Of course, that has to be done over a long period of time and with principled ideology behind it, but that has to be the ultimate goal. Otherwise, we will never get out of the debt spiral we're in. And despite what the MMT folks say, people, just because we have a monopoly producer of money, doesn't mean the debt doesn't matter. It does. Financing that debt does matter, and it has an incredible effect on your life as the government tries to monetize the debt by printing more cash, which robs you of your hard-earned savings. You cannot let this happen.
Which, by the way, Trump encouraged the Fed to do when he was president.
In fact, he wanted interest rates to drop to negative. He wanted to stoke the economy, just like every politician was, to give the impression that he's a great president who's doing great things for the economy. It's demand-driven stuff that creates what they call bubbles that burst, my friend, and they burst in a very bad way. And we've, in our own lifetime, have had a number of these bubbles bursts. And it's a matter of time before one bursts in a catastrophic way. I mean, we've been predicting this as free market economists and necessians have been doing this for quite a long time. Saying that driving up the debt is an untenable position for us to continue to hold. We just don't know when the crash will happen. It will happen if we continue along this course. We just don't know when. So look, our immigration policy is an open border policy where anybody who wants to come work and be self-sufficient and achieve
the American Capitalist Party.
That's right, ours. Okay. What did I say?
You said ours, but but I don't know if we meant America's or what. As a party.
I just assumed the American Capitalist Party's our position is that borders should be open so that people can be free to enjoy the American dream, which is for everyone. The American Revolution, as Thomas Jefferson understood, was not just a revolution of British citizens against the British Crown. It was a revolution of humanity. It was a deeper formulation of the concept of rights than existed before, and it extends to every person out there. And with respect to tariffs, we understand that free markets make you powerful. Open borders make you powerful. An economy that does not restrain trade makes you powerful. Politicians don't make you powerful. The object of politics is to restrain. And in an ideal world, as the American Capitalist Party would say, that the restraint would be restraint of force and regulation of force, not regulation of human action, which they do now. Michael, are there any final words or comments perhaps that you see in the chat that
I just want to thank everybody that's joined us. We're going to be here every day doing this. Sometimes, one of us, probably Mark more often than me, because again, he works and I don't do much. So,
I disagree.
I'm teasing.
I know.
I'm teasing.
You do it. I just want to say, you do a ton, and people should visit your site. They should visit the Rational Egoist podcast. They should listen to what you have to say, because I know. Rand said when she read certain people, it made her smarter. When I listen to you and your podcast, and when I listen to your debates, you make me smarter.
Well, thank you. That's an excellent compliment. But we will be doing this every day. We will be addressing current events from the perspective of individual rights and capitalism, and I'm very excited about this. Very excited.
Me too. Well, guys, unless there's any chat that you want to read, Michael, is there anything that?
No, there's somebody said weekends too in the chat. Planet Pellegrino. No, I should have said daily during the week. I do need some time off.
That's right. You need some time to cultivate your relationship and recharge your brain for Monday. All right, guys. So it's been a pleasure. This is the premiere episode of Capitalist Corner. Join us every day at the same time at 9 a.m. Pacific. That's 12 p.m. Eastern. And whatever the heck it is overseas, stay up late at night to watch us if you have to. We have things to say that are countercultural, controversial, and should stimulate your mind and make you change your thinking. So keep staying tuned, and we'll see you tomorrow. Peace.
Awesome.